If you're learning German, you're probably being bombarded by talk of the nominative, genitive, accusative, and dative cases. So what does this all mean? How can you conceptualize it? And how do you use it in German? That's what we're talking about today. But first, let me introduce myself. My name is Carlie Sitzman, and I am a linguist who helps people learn German and communicate effectively in the language. So if you like receiving interesting and useful videos about German grammar and culture, subscribe below, hit the like button, and join me for my other videos. Okay, we're talking about cases today. So there's 4 of them in German: nominative, accusative, dative, and genitive. So we'll just go through them one by one to start. The one big thing that these cases influence is, I would say, conjugation. In German, words take a lot of different forms. Verbs are always conjugated. There's always different endings for those. Adjectives have different endings. There are different types of pronouns depending on the case. There are different kinds of definite and indefinite articles depending on the case. So many things change to adapt to the case in German grammar that you really have to know what case you are using at all times, which is why it's important to get these definitions down. Okay, so the first one is going to be nominative, and the nominative case is equivalent to the subject in English, and that would be the subject of the sentence. So in English, the subject of the sentence is the person, place, or thing that is doing the action, right? So if something is nominative case, it's probably going to be the subject of the sentence. Then you're going to have accusative, which is the direct object, and anything in the accusative case is going to be the thing being acted upon. So if you say, I send a letter, I would be nominative, and a letter would be accusative. But in English, the articles and the pronouns don't change very much at all, so you hardly even notice what case it is. And in German, it's a different story. You would have a different article, you would have a different pronoun, depending. So, yeah, just keep that in mind as you learn. And then we have dative, which would be the indirect object. So if I said, I send you a letter, then you would be dative, or the indirect object. And so the indirect object just answers the question of for whom or to whom. And if you think about it, these are often things that you could use with a preposition. Like you could say, I send a letter to you. That would also be correct, and it would be natural. So the dative is often associated with prepositions, even in English, and in German as well. But the dative is roughly the indirect object in English. Genitive corresponds to the possessive in German, or genitive forms can be used to replace of, so then you don't need the word of at all. It's just implied. So why don't we just use the words subject, direct object, indirect object, possessive in German? Why do we have to use nominative, accusative, dative, and genitive? And the reason is that a lot of grammatical features in German do not exist in English, and they do not necessarily correspond to the subject, indirect object, and direct object way of thinking about things. So if you simply said subject, direct object, indirect object, you would have a really hard time describing some features of German grammar. But if you use nominative, accusative, dative, and genitive, that makes it easier to identify something and say that's dative, and then you can relate it back to what you already know about, which is the indirect object in that case. So these names are just helping you deal with German grammatical features that don't exist in English. And one of the really big ones is prepositions, because prepositions are often associated with the dative case in German. But for example, if there is motion, then how do I describe this? If there is motion, it will not be, the prepositional phrase will not be in the dative case anymore. It will be in the accusative case. And that's because in German you don't have words like into, because in English into shows the motion from one place to another. So instead of saying into, they just change the case of the prepositional phrase from dative to accusative. And the accusative case in a preposition shows you that there is motion. So that's one where you would want to be able to point out that's the accusative case. And because it's accusative, I know that there's motion happening. So if this is just getting overwhelming for you right now, take a deep breath. It's okay. All you have to know is that German has grammatical features that do not exist in English, and these cases are very useful for describing those situations. So if you get the definition of these four down, this preliminary definition of subject, direct object, indirect object, that will help you. And down the road, you can get into the more complicated things and you will do fine. If you have any more questions, let me know in the comments below. And I'll see you in the next video. Tschüss!